Chapter 25. Sir Happy's strategy for finding the journal seemed straightforward enough. Sir Happy would scour the library floor for any direct scent trace of Devlin, places where the young man might have stood directly on the floor. If any traces were found, I would investigate those areas more closely, meaning I would search each shelf in the general area for anything resembling a journal. Between Sir Happy's superior sense of smell and my dogged determination, I hoped we would have the entire case concluded in time for supper. How very naive my hope turned out to be. When the clock struck midnight, we were still no closer to finding the journal than when we started. By this point, I was beyond the point of weariness and was beginning to ease my way into outright exhaustion when my dear friend announced he had found something. "Thank heaven!" I exclaimed. I was beginning to have my doubts about this mess. Sir Happy looked at me with an expression which was a mixture of triumph and amusement as he said, "My guess, old chap, is you were beginning to lose steam like a great locomotive, much in need of another shovelful of coal." I snorted at the suggestion, but could come up with no convincing rebuttal, since what he had said was absolutely true. I was positively spent. Had my friend not called me to him with his fine, I might very well have curled up on one of the damask chairs by the fireplace and taken an extended rest to refresh myself. I knew a great deal of activity would follow my friend's summon, and I wanted nothing more than to take my leave of the whole murder business and surrender myself to a nice long cat nap to regain my strength. I had grown to dread every time Sir Happy said he had found something. Searching the shelves for Devlin's mysterious journal amongst the rest of the books in each massive bookcase was an awkward business at best, especially for me. I had to conduct my portion of the search while balancing precariously on one of the library's many-wheeled ladders that was attached to a track near the top of the bookcases. Since I was more nimble and better equipped to negotiate the climb than Sir Happy, I was assigned the task of scrutinizing the upper four shelves, while Sir Happy was responsible for only the lower two. The division of labor makes perfect sense to me now, but at the time I was tired and a bit irritable and wanted nothing more than to see an end to this mess. So unfortunately, I was less than cooperative with the newest summons. Why must I search so many shelves?" I complained. "What are you going to do while I pore over all of these tomes?" I asked, sounding more and more like a spoiled child with each breath. "It is quite simple, Mommy," Sir Happy replied. "You are searching the uppermost shelves because you are better with heights than I am. Besides, I will be searching the floor for any clues I might have missed during my initial inspection of the floor." "Very well," I grumbled, and scurried up to the top of the ladder. Although I have a less than stellar physique and might appear to the untrained eye to be wobbly about the middle when I walk, I have always been quite graceful when it comes to climbing, so I had no difficulties balancing on the ladder rungs as I searched each title. Before my ascent, I took a momentary glance around the room. It appeared as though everyone else was exhausted by the efforts of the day as well. Magistrate Peavy, Lestrand, and our own dear Charles had lost the battle of consciousness and slumbered in a heap where they sat. Lord Pierrepont and Humphreys were not far behind them, as their heads began to bob up and down as they struggled to stay awake. The only two individuals with the stamina to follow Sir Happy's and my activity were Hiram and Lord Devlin, the latter of the two having a most unpleasant look on his face as he watched us. One might even go so far as to describe it as a sinister expression. It made me nervous to be scrutinized by so unpleasant a glare, but I took great comfort in the knowledge that Hiram was equally attentive, but decidedly on our side. I made quick work of my search of the top shelf, and even of the second, but the third one down proved to be a bit more challenging. Where the top two shelves contained books with very legible titles, the third shelf contained books with no titles at all. Because of this, I was forced to examine each volume individually to determine its contents. What a tedious job it turned out to be. After a good 30 or 40 minutes of perusal, I was able to determine the unmarked volumes were a collection of the Pierrepont family's financial ledgers going back at least 100 years. My curiosity regarding the true financial status of the Pierrepont estate was almost overwhelming. But since we were not searching for these records, I had no choice but to continue the task to which I had been assigned. When I reached the end of the fourth shelf, I still had not located Devlin's journal, and based on his activity of sniffing about the floor, neither had Sir Happy. "I am afraid, dear friend," I said as I read the very last title, "Devlin's journal eludes us yet again." Sir Happy looked up from his activity and demanded, "Do you mean to say it's not there?" I shook my head. "It has to be there, Marmee. Look again," Sir Happy barked. My fur bristled at his tone. We had both reached the edge of our limits, and Sir Happy was beginning to boil over with frustration. "Look here, Sir Happy," I said as I left my perch on the ladder to get nose to nose with my friend. "I'm not some servant you can bark orders to. I'm your equal, and what is more, I'm your friend. So if you please, sir, lose the condescending attitude and adjust your tone to something a little more befitting our relationship." I had had enough of the whole bloody business and was ready to surrender to defeat. I walked a few paces away and sat down with my back to Sir Happy. If there was one thing I could not abide, it was an officious canine. Within moments, I felt the gentle pressure of Sir Happy's nose on my back. It was not one of his customary playful pokes meant to badger and annoy. This was more gentle and apologetic, if a nudge can be gentle and apologetic. "I am sorry, Marmee," Sir Happy said. "I was completely out of line just now. I did not mean to bark orders at you. You deserve better from me. It is just I am certain the journal is hidden here on these shelves or very near them. There can be no other place. Of that I am certain. But where exactly I cannot say. But it is just here." There was so much distress in my friend's voice, and a part of him seemed at a loss for words to describe what he knew in his heart to be true. Sir Happy had found the exact area where he believed the journal had been hidden, but he could not say for certain where the hiding place was. He was like a person who had seen an apparition, but was unable to describe it when called upon to do so. I could not remain angry at Sir Happy, not with him being in such distress. "I forgive you, my friend," I said, turning around to face him once again. "We shall talk this through together. Tell me, Sir Happy, what it is you have found which makes you so certain we are in the correct location. Why, is it here precisely, and not across the room or upstairs for that matter?" Sir Happy crinkled his brow, much the way he does when he is worried or uncertain of himself. "I haven't really found anything concrete," he said. "It is more a feeling than anything else. There's a scent pattern here which is jumbled and faint, with layers of warring scents which seem in contradiction to each other. But I would wager everything I hold dear it is the scent of the journal we seek. But where it is precisely, I haven't the foggiest idea. As you so astutely observed, it eludes me. It is here, yet it is not here. I cannot explain in any other terms, because I do not understand myself." I sniffed the air with every fiber of my being in an effort to detect this faint layering of scents my friend spoke of. I cleared my mind of everything except my purpose. I shut out the musty smell of old books and the still lingering stink on Sir Happy's coat from the kennels, and everything else scent-related which I could identify. I imagined the air around me was a river of scent currents, and I was looking for one small scent pocket where Sir Happy's scent anomaly existed. Just when I thought I had reached the other side of my great scented river, I found it, Sir Happy's anomaly. The mixture of scents was subtle, but it was there. It was reminiscent of the streets of London, where 1,000 odors wove a complex tapestry for the nose to enjoy. It was glorious, and at times decidedly unpleasant, but it was home to me, and I smelled a bit of it here. There was something else in what I detected. Something began to overpower the cacophony of scents, which disturbed my heart as much as it offended my senses. It was the smell of blood which had begun to putrefy. It was not strong enough for a person to detect, but it was strong enough for my friend and me to perceive. But where was it coming from? Perhaps it is emanating from the floorboards, I offered. Do you smell it? Sir Happy asked. Unfortunately, I do, I said. Wonderful, Sir Happy exclaimed. Yes, I've thought of the floorboards myself, but none of them are loose, and not one of them shows evidence of having been pried. Their edges are smooth, if not a little well worn. The scent, however, is so near the floor, the source has to be close by somewhere. I looked my friend over from nose to tail. How much do you weigh, Sir Happy? I asked. I beg your pardon, Sir Happy asked. It is hardly an appropriate response. I would wager, I continued, as if he hadn't said a word, I weigh a good bit more than you do. Perhaps, my dear friend, you do not weigh enough to pivot a loose board, or perhaps you are not applying pressure in the right location. My claws are thin enough to slip between these boards. If there is a loose one, I shall find it. I immediately set to work. I thought if I applied my weight in one enormous burst, I might be able to dislodge even the tightest fitting board used to cover a secret compartment. If such an approach failed to produce results, I would implement my secondary plan, which was to insert my razor-thin claws in any gaps which existed where two boards met, and attempt to pry one or the other up from the floor, again seeking to uncover any hidden apartments. I bounced and clawed at every seam and every board within a 2-meter radius of my friend, never considering it must have appeared to the people in the room as though I had had one too many excursions into the catnip patch. While I bounced about the room, Sir Happy pursued other means of discovery. When I initially joined Sir Happy to begin a closer examination of the bookcase, which contained the volumes of the Pierrepont family finances, I failed to notice that just below the bottom shelf was one of the elaborate relief carvings which had so intrigued me when I first entered the library. This particular carved panel differed from the others. Instead of depicting a natural setting with animals and trees, it was completely comprised of intricately carved whorls and other embellishments. Certain portions of the carving were deeply set, while others appeared to barely scratch the surface. What made this panel so remarkable was how unremarkable it was when compared to the other panels sprinkled throughout the rest of the library. But it was to this particular panel which Sir Happy focused his full attention. I only noted my friend's close inspection peripherally, but as I was occupied with my own pursuits, regardless of how fruitless they proved to be, I paid him no mind. I wish now I had been more attentive, because I missed the moment when my friend discovered the secret of this unremarkable panel and what lay behind it. As it turned out, the two deepest swirls, when pushed simultaneously, disengaged an internal lock which held the panel flush against the rest of the bookcase, allowing the panel to swing inward, revealing a hidden compartment spanning the length of the shelves. Another deeply set swirl could be used to lock the panel back in place. It was an ingenious apparatus which enabled a seamless integration of the compartment's entrance with its surroundings. It was positively undetectable, unless you were a dachshund with a penchant for discovering the undiscoverable. Sir Happy was barely able to break through my concentration with a lively, "Mommy, I have found it!" I turned around just in time to see my friend plunge headfirst into the abyss of the compartment, throwing all caution to the wind and retrieving the very thing his nose had been telling him was there all along. I ran over immediately to see if I might be of some assistance to him, only to find myself nose to nose with my friend as he extracted his prize. Sir Happy carried in his mouth a cloth-bound bundle tied together with a bit of twine. The outer edges and underside of the bundle were encrusted with putrid flakes of dried blood. My friend had found the source of the strange overlapping scent pattern, and he was ecstatic over his discovery. He could not have been more pleased had he located Blackbeard's treasure or revealed the ever-elusive site of Shangri-La. The flurry of activity was the magic kiss that awoke our sleeping beauties from their slumber. All eyes were now upon Sir Happy and his bloody prize. Sir Happy was ecstatic about his discovery, so much so he began digging at the knot of the twine in an effort to access the contents of the bundle. He was in enough of a frenzy, I was afraid he would damage some portion of the contents before he was able to get it open. "Hello, me," said Hiram, as he walked up carrying the penknife he always kept close at hand. It never would have been a worthwhile defensive weapon, but for this application it proved invaluable. It was a tense moment for all of us as we waited for Hiram to cut the twine and gently unwrap the contents of the bundle. Even now I cannot say if I was truly surprised by Sir Happy's discovery, but as I scanned the room during the bundle's unveiling, I saw surprise was the common expression on everyone's face. Everyone except Humphreys. His expression was more akin to dismay as Hiram peeled away the last layer of cloth to reveal a book. When Hiram held up the book, however, for the group's inspection, Devlin's face blanched. I saw the young man open his mouth as though he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Devlin looked at Humphreys as though the old man was his greatest enemy. Devlin's eyes bored into the back of Humphrey's head, as if by sheer will he could pierce the old man's brain. The sudden transformation of the young man's feeling towards his servant was lost to me until Hiram announced Sir Happy had indeed discovered Devlin's journal, and it was caked with blood. This was precisely the break in the case Hiram had so desperately needed. He was so pleased by the discovery, in fact, he reached over and began scratching Sir Happy behind the ears. The ear scratching for Sir Happy was like brandy in the hands of a dry alcoholic. He could not resist the indulgence. Sir Happy's tail began to wag profusely, and the attention elicited the natural canine response of several well-placed licks upon Hiram's face. It was a grand moment for them both, and perhaps the worst moment for all the rest of the observers in the room, Charles excluded. I, for my part, had had enough, and was ready to surrender the accolades to the two who most deserved them. With Hiram's affirmation, we had indeed achieved our goal for the day of locating Devlin's journal. I wandered off in the direction of the library's fireplace to warm my bones, and spend a bit of time attending to some badly needed grooming. I left the group with Charles clapping Hiram roundly on the back and congratulating him and Sir Happy for a job well done. In the midst of all the attaboys and congratulations, no one noticed that Devlin had maneuvered himself closer to where Hiram and Sir Happy were celebrating the triumphant discovery of the journal with ear scratches and licks to the hand and face. Neither of them anticipated the moment when Devlin lifted up out of his wheelchair and made a dash for his journal until it was too late. Hiram was slammed to the floor, and the journal was snatched from his hands before anyone realized what had happened. My friend, Sir Happy, had been correct about Devlin's capacity for motion, but neither he nor I could have anticipated just how fluid the young man's movements could be. Seeing him dash around the library furniture to evade Hiram's grasp was like watching a star rugby player maneuver around the defenses of the opposing team. Devlin had little to fear from Magistrate Peavy or Constable Lestrade, as neither man had any intention of interfering in the matter. Had they managed to share a backbone between them, they might have been some measure of assistance, but alas, both men were content to remain where they were, as long as where they were did not become part of the playing field. I watched this lively game of chase from the safety of my perch until the primary participants began to make their way towards me and my toasty fire. There was little doubt in my mind Devlin intended to hurl his journal into the fire, along with whatever damning evidence it contained. Hiram did everything he could to block the way, but he was no match for this agile young man. In an effort to avoid the scuffle I knew was imminent, I raced behind a large wing-backed chair, only to discover I had chosen the exact path Devlin had taken. Our collision was monumentally disastrous. With every attempt we made to avoid each other, the worse our entanglement became. Apparently, the young man's agility was no match for my panicked inelegance. Devlin went crashing to the floor with a loud thud, trapping me beneath him. I howled and thrashed and hissed and clawed at whatever I could get my paws on. Pain shot through every part of my body, but none more than my back right leg. Devlin had broken it under the impact of his fall, an injury which vexes me to this day when the winds turn cold. The sudden realization I had such a catastrophic injury from our collision filled me with such rage. Before I knew what I was doing, I gave Devlin a savage bite to the hand which held the journal. He struggled fiercely against the pain. The more he struggled, however, the more I hurt, and the more I hurt, the harder I bit. Had Hiram not intervened, we might have perished in such a fashion, caught in an endless yet not so epic battle between man and beast. Hiram threw his full weight upon the lad and twisted Devlin's unencumbered arm behind his back. My friend Hiram then did his best to gently extricate the young man's other arm from my fearsome grip. When I finally realized Hiram had subdued Devlin, I let go to tend my wounds, but not before delivering a parting claw-filled slash to the side of my enemy's face. I was positively pleased and very self-satisfied with my daring blow. Unfortunately, as the adrenaline began to subside, the pain in my leg exploded, and I found I could not contain my howls of sheer agony. Sir Happy, who had arrived on hand at some point during the scuffle, was very quick to offer both his assistance and his praise for my having apprehended the young man before Devlin had a chance to throw his journal into the fire. "Well done, old chap," Sir Happy exclaimed. "Very good show. To think my feline friend challenged a full-grown man and bested him to boot. It appears you have inflicted a considerable amount of damage in your efforts to prevent the destruction of evidence." I glanced at Devlin and saw he was nursing a badly mangled hand and a bloody face, both of which were beginning to show signs of swelling. "I suppose he will think twice before crossing my path again," I said with a half-hearted smile. I told my friend my heroics were a complete accident, and I could not claim any level of bravery when I had done my best to avoid the whole affair. Sir Happy was quick to point out, accident or not, my valiance had still managed to save the day. For a brief moment I felt almost as noble as Sir Happy's accolades suggested. My very next step, however, was enough to melt away whatever pride or sense of satisfaction I might have felt as a result of the whole encounter. The pain was so great, I collapsed where I stood. "What is it, Mommy?" Sir Happy cried. "Where's the matter?" I could hear the deep concern in my friend's voice. "That damnable Devlin has shattered my leg," was all I could get out. I think I swooned for just a moment. Sir Happy barked frantically for Charles to come quickly, and he was at my side in an instant, examining my body for whatever injury had caused my current state. It did not take him long to find the fracture. "Good heavens!" Charles exclaimed. "Hiram, Mommy has a very serious fracture, which must be attended to immediately." Turning to Lestrade, Charles instructed him to help move me over to a table which was close by. Lestrade did not budge. "It was not a request, Lestrade. Get your French fanny over here." The look on Charles's face was very intense and immovable, which was contrary to his normal good-natured expression. It had the intended effect of inspiring Lestrade to cooperate. "Careful now," Charles instructed, as he and Lestrade lifted me from the floor. "Keep his head level and support his shoulders." Lestrade was surprisingly gentle as they laid me on the table's surface. Even with their care, the pain was unbearable. Charles gave me a shot in the haunch as soon as I was settled. He rubbed the shot location for a few minutes and gently stroked the hair on my face as he told me what he was going to do. "Mommy, your leg is badly broken," Charles said. "I've given you something for pain, but it will take time for it to take effect. I don't believe we have the luxury of time to wait for the drug to enter your bloodstream. However, I must set it quickly, or there could be complications. I'm already concerned we will need to operate because your fracture is a compound one. The setting will hurt tremendously, but it will help the bone knit properly. May I proceed?" I trusted Charles implicitly, and although I was not relishing the idea of what he was about to do, I knew Charles would not cause me additional pain if it was not absolutely necessary. I nodded. He could continue. "Lestrade, hold him down like so," Charles said, showing the man the proper way to restrain me. "Apply enough pressure to his body so he cannot move, but not so much pressure you interfere with his breathing. I only want to do this once, so keep him still." To his credit, Lestrade was very effective. I could breathe, but I could not move otherwise. Charles took hold of my leg and said, "Prepare yourself, Mommy. This is going to hurt." I braced myself, believing I was ready for what was to come, but nothing could prepare me for the amount of agony I experienced when Charles set my leg. It was so intense, my conscious mind could take it no more. I slipped into blissful darkness, but not before I heard Lestrade cry out, "Mon Dieu, I have killed him!" Chapter 26. The rest of my time at the Pierrepont estate is a bit of a blur, even now. I slipped in and out of consciousness for several days, and from my later discussions with my friend Sir Happy, I gave them all quite a scare. I developed a serious fever almost immediately after my leg was set, and Charles feared I would not survive the injury. For 2 whole days, Sir Happy never left my side, refusing both food and rest, while reporting to Charles every time I regained any semblance of consciousness. Charles slept on one of the couches in the library until his own body was riddled with stiffness and pain. It was a vigil neither Charles nor Sir Happy would surrender, not even for a moment of fitful sleep. While I danced alarming close to my hereafter, there was flurry of activity surrounding the events which led to my convalescence. After Devlin's ill-fated attempt to destroy his journal. It was evident to everyone in the room the journal we were so fortunate to discover was of great importance and contained secrets of some sort which Devlin was determined to keep hidden at any cost. It was agreed upon that Hiram and Sir Happy would examine the contents of the journal as soon as Devlin was immobilized, while Charles tended to me. The rest of the party, namely the elder Lord Pierrepont, Magistrate Peavy, Lestrade, and Humphreys, were forced to remain where they were in case the contents of the journal implicated any of them in the activities which were nefarious in nature. Having read the journal myself since then, I can attest the contents were as damning as they get. For all intents and purposes, Devlin made an outright confession to being culpable for the attacks which held London in an iron grip of terror. Devlin's journal contained vivid details surrounding every attack and every victim. He described with alarming clarity how and why each victim had been chosen. Niall Peterson, one of the earlier victims, had taken Devlin's place at Eton College after Devlin had been expelled for cheating. Lily Wybert, had been Devlin's love interest and was attacked with the sole purpose of enabling Devlin to be her savior. Unfortunately, Alvina Henrys, a later victim, delayed Devlin from his moment of heroic glory, and Herbert Falkland saved Lily from Brutus. Unfortunately, his bravery was repaid with an attack of his own. Penelope Grayson, Percy's little girl who was saved by her father, was an accidental victim. Her father, Sir Geoffrey Grayson, had been the real target of the attack because he had spurned Devlin after Brutus lost a dogfight which Sir Geoffrey's had bet upon in Brutus's favor. Jessup McGibbons was killed because he witnessed the Grayson attack and could identify Devlin as being responsible for it. Even Mr. Snuffle's girl had been singled out because her eyes had lingered too long upon Devlin's person one day when he had visited the market. Devlin had twisted childish curiosity into a blatant affront, and the poor child had suffered for it. Devlin's reasoning for choosing his victims was not sound, as though barbarity, cruelty could ever be characterized as sound. Devlin was a young man who looked for offense everywhere he went, and warranted or not, he found offense in every turn of the cheek, in every lingering glance, in every person who crossed his path. He was consumed by these transgressions, and was determined to make his offenders suffer with whatever means were at his disposal. Brutus became Devlin's weapon of choice, and he used his living weapon to exact his revenge for any and every perceived wrong. The more success Devlin had, the more emboldened he became. It was chilling to see into the mind of this young man. His thoughts reflected a malevolent and corrupted heart. There is a reason why it is written, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks, and in my mind the pen dictates. There was one omission from the journal which gnawed at Sir Happy as he read through each page. Of all the details associated with each attack and memorialized in the pages of Devlin's journal, including the murder of McGibbons, there was no mention of Stephen Hanover's attack. His attack had been one of the most brutal and calculated of his attacks, and yet the journal was completely silent on the subject. How could a young man who had recorded such minute detail like the style and color of his victims' clothing at the moment of their attack fail to mention, even in the smallest terms, what would have been his greatest triumph? Even Hiram made note of this apparent inconsistency, but immediately dismissed it, suggesting Devlin had not had time to record his triumph before they all had arrived to investigate.
Besides, Hiram added, the last few pages were ruined by the blood. He could not have recorded the event, even if he had had the time to do so. There's no doubt in my mind, however, he is responsible for what happened to Stephen. It matters little he neglected to write about it. We have our man.
It did appear as though Devlin was responsible for everything. It all seemed to fit together. There was little question in anyone's mind. Devlin was guilty. Everything pointed to the fact that Stephen had discovered Devlin's journal and had taken it with the intent of bringing it back to London to deliver it to Hiram as evidence against the young man. The smell of Stephen's bare feet in the hallway and the lingering remnant of him on Devlin's dresser all made sense now the journal was found and encrusted with Stephen's blood. Devlin had meant to murder Stephen, and Stephen had feared for his life as he left the Pierrepont estates. Stephen knew he was in danger, and he had taken every possible precaution to ensure his survival. He risked his life to close the case, and now he had. Hiram, being certain of a conviction thanks to the contents of the journal, escorted Devlin and the evidence against him back to London.
I shall not be gone long, Hiram said. As soon as the prisoner is safely incarcerated, I shall return to gather the lot of you and take you all home. Besides, I do not believe Marmee is in any condition to travel at the moment.
Turning to the elder Lord Pierrepont, he added,
I am afraid we must impose upon your hospitality, sir, as our dear friend is in no condition to be moved. I shall return within a few days, if it is acceptable to you.
Lord Pierrepont replied, It makes no difference to me. I have business to attend to elsewhere, unless I'm still under confinement. Hiram assured him he was free to go. Then Humphrey shall attend to your needs. Turning to his servant, Lord Pierrepont said, Make sure they are comfortable, Humphrey. I would hate to be accused of being inhospitable. I shall return in a week or so. Very good, sir, Humphreys replied. Soon after, Lord Jeremy left the manor. I wish I could say it was our last encounter with the impertinent lord, but such was not to be the case. People like him are not unlike an unfortunate rash which never seems to completely disappear. But that is for another time, and another case altogether. It was near the end of my 4th day of convalescence when I awoke to the irritating tickles of a feather duster. Humphreys was dusting the table upon which I lay, lifting the various medical odds and ends which surrounded me, with little regard to my person. I was feathered many times in the face before the old man realized I was conscious, which much less annoyed by his activities. I hissed in protest when I was assaulted yet again by his wand of irritation.
Pardon me, sir,
Humphreys said finally.
I did not intend to disturb you, but I must be about my duties, injured cat or not.
I looked about the room for my friends, but could find no sign of them. It appeared as though, for the time being, I was completely alone with the feather-wielding butler. As I took in my surroundings, I noticed the library, or at least the section I was in, had been transformed into a makeshift triage unit, with me as its sole patient. Charles's medical supplies were neatly laid out on a nearby hassock, much the same way they were when Stephen and he were preparing for surgery, which caused me to remember the injury to my leg. The lower half of me was bandaged in such a way I found it nearly impossible to move. The initial discovery was at first alarming, till I remembered what Charles had said to me right before I passed out. He had indicated the fracture was severe and had mentioned his concern the break might require some type of surgery. I later found out a small shard of bone had worked its way through the muscle, puncturing the surface of the skin. The bit of bone had nearly severed some important something or other, which I cannot pronounce, and Charles had been forced to surgically remove it to prevent any further damage from being done. He also did his best to repair what he could, praying my body would take care of the rest. Because of the fever I had developed almost immediately following the injury, Charles had feared performing the surgery because, in his mind, I was too weak to support the anesthesia required. There was a greater risk of my never regaining consciousness, and so Charles had elected to wait a few days to give the fever a chance to break. Once he felt I was strong enough and stable enough, Charles used a long-acting sedative of his own formulation to ensure I would not wake up during the procedure, and removed the bone shard. It had taken a good long while for the effects of the sedative to wear off.
"Do not fret, little cat,"
Humphreys said when he realized I was looking for my companions.
"Mr. Hurst and the dog are still here. They are taking their leisure in one of the upstairs chambers. I cannot say the same for your inspector friend, however. He has left for London with young Master Devlin to take him to prison."
The old man pulled over one of the many chairs in the room and sat down next to me.
"I don't suppose you will tell anyone if I take a moment to rest these old bones. It's been a trying last few days."
Humphreys reached over and rubbed the soft fur between my ears.
"You seem a nice sort of fellow," he said. "If one could overlook the shedding fur, I would imagine you might make a nice companion. Yes, I could see myself retiring to a nice little cottage here in the country and keeping a cat like you."
The head rubs were soothing, especially when given my current condition, and the conversation, although completely one-sided, was helping me keep my mind off of the growing pain in my leg. The old man seemed inclined to chat, and as long as he continued to stroke my fur, I did not mind the company.
"You know,"
Humphreys continued,
"I think I shall do just that. Retire and leave the duties of this house to a younger soul. I have grown weary of my services here, and with my boy Devlin gone, there really is no point in my remaining in Lord Pierrepont's employ. Did you know, little cat, I have worked for this family for most of my life. 3 generations of them. 4, if you count Lord Henry, but he died only a few days after I was hired on, so I'm not certain if he can be counted. The things I have seen happen within these walls. Yes, I would say I have earned my rest."
I drifted in and out of a pleasant doze as Humphreys recited his many years within the walls of the manor, serving the various lords and ladies who had called it their home. I might have fallen completely asleep had the old man not begun talking in more detail about his young Lord Devlin.
"I knew this day would come sooner or later for my boy Devlin,"
Humphreys said.
"and Lord knows I've done my best to postpone it. He was always into mischief, and more often than not I was left to clean up the mess. Not that I objected, mind you. After all, he was like a son to me. I practically raised the land after his mother died."
Humphreys stared off in silence for a moment, no doubt recollecting some memory of Devlin as a young lad. He then proceeded to expound about the bond he shared with Devlin, and about how he had taken Devlin under his wing when Devlin's father had rejected him.
"I taught Devlin everything a good father should. Who do you think taught him to walk? I did. I helped train him to do what no doctor thought possible. I taught him to fight, too, to use his cunning with his opponent, not just his strength. And look at him now. He is a fine figure of a man, well able to give your inspector friend a run for his money. I dare say no one expected him to be capable of such feats, least of all Lord Pierrepont."
No one anticipated his potential except Sir Happy, I thought to myself.
"Yes, it was our little secret. Humphreys continued. Like so many others.
Again, the far-away gaze, as though Humphreys was remembering something from the past. Why the old man felt compelled to share so much with me, I could not say. It struck me as odd at the time, but over the years I have learned a thing or two about human nature. Throughout the many years of adventure shared with my dear friend Sir Happy, I have observed a strange phenomenon among humanity's underbelly. For some inexplicable reason, guilty men seemed compelled to confess their sins in one form or another, to whomever or whatever is closest at hand. It is a mystery I've pondered many times before, and the only conclusion I have come to in all of these years is secrets are incredibly hard to maintain. Barmaids and barbers alike have found themselves unwilling confessors to bandits and heathens who seemed dead set on making these poor souls privy to their sordid evil deeds. More often than not, the darker the crime, the more obligated the perpetrator is to disclose it. For my part, it has always been my conscience working hand in hand with a deep moral conviction which has guided my actions, ensuring I would never intentionally harm another living soul. There is no question I have had my failures in treating others exactly how I should. I have given my fair share of injuries by being judgmental of others, or unkind to God's gentler creatures. Lord knows those injuries have haunted me enough, so I have endeavored never to repeat whatever careless word or action caused them. So what happens when a person has no conscience or moral conviction? What prevents them from plunging into the darkest depths of abomination again and again? What inhibits a depraved, immoral soul from pursuing every loathsome and repugnant pursuit at the detriment of everyone they encountered? The unfortunate answer is nothing.
I will admit something to you, little cats,
Humphreys continued in a hushed, conspiratorial tone.
I feel a bit guilty letting Devlin take the blame for my actions, but with him being involved in the murder and all of the other attacks, adding one more transgression to the list won't make much of a difference. Besides, I was only trying to protect the lad from himself and his own carelessness.
Whether it was because of my condition or the residue of the sedative still in my system, I was not following exactly what the old man was telling me. My mind rebelled against me and would not process in its usual way. Even now there is a dream-like quality to the event which made me question for some time whether everything I witnessed was real, or perhaps in part a figment of my drug-saturated brain. Humphreys continued his tale.
It seemed a perfect plan to me at the time, that is, silencing the good doctor before he had a chance to notify the authorities of what he had uncovered about young Devlin. Of course, I never anticipated your clever little friend would trace it all back to this household. I'd hoped we would have put an end to it in the streets of London, but Brutus was apparently not up to the task. Your little dog friend is very clever indeed. But then again, it was Devlin's own fault I had to take matters into my own hands in the first place. If that boy would learn to put his things away, Dr. Hanover never would have found the lad's journal sitting open on this very table. Of course, the doctor's curiosity was his own undoing, but if Devlin had been more sharp-witted in his actions and attentive of his surroundings, like I taught him, he would have known the doctor was watching as he placed his precious memory book in its secret location. Stupid boy!
Humphreys continued to stroke my fur.
Do you know, Devlin came crying to me when he discovered it was missing, Humphreys continued. He was like a simpering girl, wanting me to do something about it. With all of his planning and ruthlessness with the other attacks, one would have thought he could manage the silencing of one meddling doctor. On the contrary, He was a lost little boy.
Humphreys fell silent for a moment, as though his recollections were troubling.
"'Tis a shame, really," he said. "Dr. Hanover was a good sort of fellow, and he never would have been harmed had he left well enough alone. It forced my hand, you see. I had to protect my boy, no matter how dim-witted he can be. I suppose none of it matters now. Devlin is in custody, and his journal, his precious book of memories, is public and or very shortly will be. My efforts to protect him were all for naught. There's one small spark of hope for me in all of this mess, and it is your good doctor won't survive long enough to implicate me in its attack. I shall see to it."
Humphrey's face broke out into an enormous grin.
"And you won't tell anyone my plans, I dare say," he said with a chuckle. "Yes, I do believe a silent friend like you is the best friend a man like me can have."
The old man patted me on the head. I cannot begin to express the outrage and fury I felt. I was helpless to exact any sort of real revenge, and yet every fibre of my being longed to leap up from the table upon which I lay and rend the flesh from his arrogant bones. The audacity of Humphreys to stand there and blithely confess to me his complete culpability for Stephen's current condition was more than I could bear. Here was the man solely responsible for the abject suffering of those who were nearest and dearest to my heart, and I could do nothing but lie there like some old shoe. What terrified me the most, and sent me into a state of infinite dread, was the sudden knowledge Humphrey planned to travel to London and murder Stephen in his hospital bed. My head reeled. I looked about me frantically, hoping by some miracle Sir Happy or Charles had overheard Humphrey's confession. Knowing my hopes were futile. Humphreys was a shrewd and careful man. He would not be so careless as to speak where there was any threat of being overheard. Of course, to Humphreys, I did not count. I was just some stupid animal that could not comprehend what I was hearing. I was an amusement, a plaything, nothing more. Seeing my distress, Humphreys tried to settle me down. Why he cared enough to try, I will never know.
There, Kitty,"
he said, reaching once again to smooth the fur on my face. If only I had had my full faculties about me, I might have exacted a more effective defense. But as it was, I did the only thing I could do. I slashed violently at his hand and hissed as meanly as I could. Humphreys only laughed at me.
"You are a feisty one, I must say," Humphreys said, withdrawing his hand. "When I retire to my little cottage in the country, I shall look for a cat with a more even disposition."
It was the last thing he said to me. Humphreys walked away from me, whistling one of those unknown tunes which only scurrilous, heartless men like him whistle after confessing their crimes, I'm sure. My head pounded beneath the weight of this new revelation. Stephen was still in mortal danger, and it was not his wounds which posed the greatest threat to his survival. Humphrey's threat rang through my head over and over. I was at a complete loss as to what to do. It was an arduous struggle to free my brain from the effects of the sedative, which even then clouded my every thought. I knew I had to act quickly. To make matters worse, I had no use whatsoever of the bottom half of my body. One thing I had to say for Charles, he was alarmingly effective at immobilization. Painful or not, I had to find Sir Happy at all costs to me physically. Stephen was in danger as long as Humphrey's secret remained hidden, and I felt certain, given the latitude, the old man was capable of finishing what he had started with our dear friend. Humphreys had nothing to lose and everything to gain from murdering Stephen. Sir Happy's precious Stephen was the only person standing in the way of Humphrey's complete freedom, and Humphreys was determined to prevent Stephen from living long enough to threaten it. The time to act was at hand, but try as I might, I could not move. The table's surface had such a thick layer of polishing wax I could gain no traction, even with my claws. My challenge could only be likened to a man in sock feet trying to walk on an icy pond. It felt like I was in some wicked nightmare where danger lurked all around me, but I was impotent to stop it or defend against it. All I could envision as I struggled to reach the edge of the table was Humphreys sneaking into Stephen's hospital room and ending his life in some demented, untraceable manner. After all, who would ever suspect a trusted household servant did it? Those terrible images spurred me on inch by painful inch, and eventually, by some grace of God, I managed to reach the edge of the table. I peered over the verge in an effort to gauge the hazard of my descent. The distance to the floor would have been an easy one for me to make on any other day, but with my entire back end immobilized, I knew I would not have the full dexterity to make a graceful landing. The best I could hope for was a hard landing that would cause no further injury to my already broken body. I knew the collision would be painful regardless, so I willed my body over the edge. Unfortunately, the floor arrived faster than I anticipated, and I landed with a very loud thud, followed by an unintended yowl of pain. Whether it was the discordant reverberation of my crash landing, the sound of my squalling, or simply a matter of good timing, I was quickly reunited with my friends Charles and Sir Happy. To see their faces was an answer to an unspoken prayer. I was awash with relief as much as I was riddled with pain. Charles was the first to reach my side and the first to admonish me.
"Mr. Marmee," he yelled, "have you no good sense in that brain of yours? I would ask you to offer an explanation for taking such a risk, but honestly, I don't want to hear it. I can think of nothing important enough to risk breaking additional bones and tearing open the surgical stitching. It is clear to me I will have to keep you sedated till such time as it is physically safe to allow you to move."
As Charles reached for the syringe, I felt a sense of panic set in. I struggled to free myself from his grasp, to at least relay Humphrey's confession to Sir Happy. I still had enough strength to force Charles to abandon the syringe and use both hands to restrain me.
"What has gotten into you, Marmee?"
Charles exclaimed. Charles's hold was tight, but I was able to call to Sir Happy with what wind I had left. "My friend, Stephen is still in danger," I cried. Sir Happy was immediately by my side.
"What do you mean, Marmee?" Sir Happy asked. "Devlin is incarcerated and is no longer a danger. We have caught him, old man. All is well."
It was getting harder and harder for me to speak with Charles's weight upon me. I was forced to stop my struggle so I would have enough wind to tell Sir Happy the ugly truth. Devlin was only part of it, and he was not directly responsible for Stephen's attack. There is more to it than we realized. It was my distraction with Sir Happy was my undoing. In my brief moment of stillness, Charles was able to administer the fast-acting sedative which would steal my chance to warn my friend of his master's certain death. Sir Happy was frantic, knowing we only had a few seconds before the world of consciousness would be lost to me.
"Tell me quickly, what about my Stephen, Marmee?"
I could not gather my thoughts together. The room was going dim, and for the life of me I could not recall what had been so important. Sleep. Yes, that was what I wanted so desperately. Rest and blissful darkness.
"Marmee!"
Sir Happy barked in my face, rousing me just enough to overcome the sedative for one brief moment.
"What about my Stephen?"
Although I could not remember a name in the fog which had overtaken my brain, I managed one last cognitive effort before all was lost to me again.
"The butler did it,"
I cried, and all went dark.